Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen. With us for our program, Assemblyman Mike Norris. Mike Norris represents the 144th Assembly District in New York State, an Assembly District that includes Niagara, Orleans, and Erie counties. And we want to thank you folks all throughout Western New York for joining us for our program today. Mike Norris, happy 2019.
Happy 2019 to you. I'm happy to be back.
We've got lots to get caught up on here with this legislative session. A lot has changed in Albany on the landscape since our last series of programs. Elections have consequences, right? And the elections in New York State in 2018 flipped the majority in the New York State Senate. Now you've got a Democratic governor, a Democratic-led Assembly, and a Democratic-led Senate. Things are different.
Things are much different. And you know what the problem, I think, is it's impacting the people, particularly of upstate New York and Western New York. What happened is that for the longest time, we had the Republican-led majority in the state Senate. And so anything that needed to pass in government was always done in a bipartisan manner. You had the Democratic-controlled Assembly, the Republican-controlled Senate, and then the governor of either party. But everything that was passed required bipartisan support and really support throughout the entire New York State. Unfortunately now, there has been a march of very progressive matters going through the New York State legislature as a whole, and I'm going to give you an example. The DREAM Act. What the DREAM Act is, it will provide free college tuition to the tune of $27 million statewide to illegal and undocumented residents. That is absolutely absurd to me. When we have a hard time sending our own children to school, the hardworking taxpayers of particularly Western New York, they can't even send their kids to school, let alone now sending the undocumented residents of the state to school. That's one example. There's also been an assault, I believe, on the Second Amendment. Now, I've said many times that I believe, particularly after the shootings that took place throughout the United States, that reasonable measures to control the guns is appropriate, and I will give you an example on that too. Banning bump stocks. You know, we saw what happened in Las Vegas. I believe that was a reasonable measure, and that passed unanimously throughout the legislature. Not unanimously, but nearly unanimously. But there are other provisions, whether or not going through a buyback program, the red flag bill that provides no due process at all to law-abiding citizens in the state of New York. I have been a very strong proponent of the Second Amendment and making sure we stand up for those rights for the law-abiding citizens. And they've passed several measures in the past few weeks, and there's a slippery slope. In the past, I supported extending the wait period from 3 to 10 days, for example, on looking at the backgrounds of individuals who came up in the system as a yellow flag, meaning there was something that was wrong with it. Now the majority wants to go to 30 days. Well, what is next? 60 days, 90 days, 180 days? These are just affecting law-abiding good citizens. So I couldn't support the expansion to 30 days. I just think that there's a slippery slope there. And these are the things that are taking place right now in Albany. And I hear from my constituents, whether I was at a pancake breakfast in Alden the other day, our volunteer fire service installation dinners, people are telling me, Mike, this is absurd, the progressive agenda that's coming out of Albany. But I'm going to continue to fight hard so our voices are heard in the 144th District and continue to do that.
A couple of the other things that have happened here in Albany in short stead since the beginning of this legislative session. Usually sessions in Albany start off pretty slowly and you kind of build up a little momentum about halfway through or so. But the legislature hit the ground running this year, taking up bills like you mentioned, the DREAM Act, the gun control bills. You also had transgender rights. You had the Reproductive Health Act, which expands the availability of abortions in the third trimester, in the late part of the pregnancy. So you've got a lot of these things going on. Are these? I mean, you just came off campaigning to get reelected for this office. Were those the types of things people were talking to you about as you went door to door?
No. When I was going door to door, they talked to me about taxes and spending and making sure we focus on our infrastructure in New York State. You know, the governor recently said, I don't know if you know this, I mean, we have lost 1 million people in New York State since 2010. 1 million people. What did the governor say? Oh, it's because of the weather. Let me tell you, we just suffered through a very brutal period here in New York State. It was 0 degree temperatures. We made it through without any problems. And it's not because of the weather. It's because of the cost of our property taxes and our taxes in New York State, and it's because of the reckless spending that's continuing to go on. You know, we have a proposed budget that's coming up, but the governor has proposed $175 billion. When you take the states of Florida and Texas combined, that just nearly equals New York State's budget. And they have just as many problems and just as many issues in those two states, yet those two budgets combined nearly equals New York. $74 billion in terms of Medicaid spending. Nearly 40% of our budget goes into Medicaid spending. Now, I've said many times, when there's an issue and someone needs to be lifted up for a little bit, we're good Americans, we're good New Yorkers, that's fine. But when there is a cycle of dependency where these individuals are on Medicaid services for decades upon decades, I think that's really out of control. We need to do a better job. You know, I support a bill with Assemblyman Steve Hawley to drug test those recipients of Medicaid benefits. I think it's only appropriate that if you're receiving services that you're being drug tested. And also making sure we do efficiency within certain programs, whether it be our transportation systems with Medicaid services. This is something we have to look at because it's out of control. But at the same time, we are completely out of whack with the priorities of our budget. Now, the governor, I'll give you an example. The AIM funding, which is aid to municipalities. In my district alone, $500,000 is being removed from his proposed budget for aid to local municipalities. Now, I represent near a very rural area. I do have the city of Lockport, but pretty much a rural area. And this is an assault on our local rural areas. I mean, they use these funds, our funds, taxpayers' dollars that we pay into our system, into the income tax system, for our roads, to make sure we for police officers in these areas. Yet in his proposed budget, he's done that. So I've reached out to our town supervisors and our village mayors, and I've urged them to please pass resolutions to urge the governor to restore these funds. Our libraries also are under assault. The governor's his proposed budget took out $4 million in the general fund and all of the construction funding for our libraries. We depend on these libraries, particularly when it comes to our internet services, and in these rural areas, but very few people are still having full access to high-speed broadband. This is a serious problem. Many of the students, many of the residents go to our libraries to receive those services, let alone our governor's trying to cut those services. So the people in Western New York, we need to speak up. I'm advocating very strong on making sure these priorities are restored back into the budget, but I encourage everyone to please reach out to the governor, reach out to the Speaker of the Assembly, and tell them Western New York matters. Our priorities matter, and we're going to continue to do that.
The budget process just getting underway now at the state capitol. That's something that needs to be resolved by April 1st, the start of the new fiscal year. A $4 million cut to upstate libraries, and the governor's total proposed budget's like almost $180 billion.
Correct.
That seems rather
You know,
pointless.
and this is the thing, is that there has been a shift. You know, we talked earlier in the show about this shift downstate, particularly with the state senate. I mean, we've got great senators in Western New York, Senator Ransnoffer, Senator Orr, Senator Gallivan, who I'm good partners with, Senator Jacobs. And we are fighting hard to make sure those priorities are in there. But with the change in the Senate now being focused in and downstate, we have to be loud and we have to be very clear. We matter in Western New York.
Another bit of legislative work that came up right at the very beginning of the session this year had to do with election law. Members of the Democratic Party in both the Assembly and Senate saying they want to make it easier for people to vote in New York State. So a lot of different bills came out as part of one day's work. Early voting in New York State, same-day registration, things like that. Also, a bill that would change the primaries the primary dates in New York, consolidating them all onto one single date, which may sound like that's a better thing for people. They only have to go out and vote once for all these primaries. But you and some others had some questions about that.
Yeah, as the ranking member of the Election Law Committee, I'm a former elections commissioner in Niagara County, so I have some background in this and in the administration of the elections particularly. We did raise concerns regarding the consolidation of the primary. Now, ultimately, I voted for it because it's a cost measure. You know, I'm just talking about how big our budgets are, the mandates in our local municipalities, and it will save the consolidation by $25 million statewide. But petitions now will start on February 26th. You know, it is cold in Western New York in February and March, so I raised concerns about that, and we had a debate on the floor. I was happy to participate in the debate.
Let's show some of what you said when that bill came up for discussion, and then we'll be back to finish up today's Assembly calendar with Mike Norris.
In a perfect world, it would be closer to the August time frame, particularly considering the weather conditions that we have in upstate New York, which makes it very difficult for our candidates, whether they be incumbents or in challengers, to go out and to properly seek those signatures during February and early March. But when you balance this against the cost that it will have if we continue to have two primaries to the tune of $25 million, and also the need to ensure that our military and our overseas voters receive a timely ballot. Weighing that, I certainly will be supportive of this bill because it is critically important that we do the best job that we can to save municipalities, taxpayers' dollars, and also to ensure that our military voters receive their ballot on time. Unfortunately, there is no perfect solution, no perfect time, but at least this will be a step forward in promoting cost efficiency as well as protecting our military voters. And so far, Mr. Speaker, I'll be voting in the affirmative on this bill. Thank you very much.
How'd you feel overall about a lot of the ideas that came out? I know there were some concerns about like the early voting. It seems like a great idea, giving people more opportunities to cast a ballot in a general election. But some of your colleagues had concerns about how that would work.
Yeah, I mean, and I did vote against the early voting provision, and I'll tell you why. There's another solution to this, and that's called no excuse absentee ballots. So if you, right now, under New York State law, you have to have an excuse to get an absentee ballot, be out of the county or be ill within the county, and then you can get an absentee ballot. We passed a provision to amend the Constitution to allow for no excuse absentee ballot, so that you could just put your application in and you get a ballot. There is no really additional cost to local boards to do that. But the administration of 8 days of early voting, along with having multiple sites and the concerns for potential fraud at these sites, was a deep concern to me, especially when we had the solution right there with a no excuse absentee ballot. But if someone is interested in running for local office this year, you need to do it very quickly. Get a hold of your local board of elections, because petitions will be getting this year on February 26th.
Well, the times are changing.
They are certainly changing.
The times
yes.
they are changing, and they're changing to be earlier too if you're looking to run for office in New York State. There's a lot going on here at the state capitol this year. You folks, we hope you'll always be paying attention to what goes on with your state government. This, though, would you agree, might be the year more than ever to keep your eye close to what's going on in Albany?
Yes, be heard, reach out to my office, email me. On one issue alone, I had over 1,000 emails, and I want to hear from you. So please reach out to me at my district office, my Albany office. Send me an email. I'll read them all.
Let's take a look quick at how you folks can contact your representative, Mike Norris. You can do it by contacting him at his office in Williamsville, 8180 Main Street. There's the email address on the bottom of the screen, norrism@nyassembly.gov. Mike Norris, thanks for joining us today. And we want to thank you folks, too, for spending your time with us. See you for our next Assembly Calendar.